Awesome. My name is Anne Algon, or Butler. My mini ethnography project was on ADHD. My interviewee is Skylar Rowe, which is um, a pseudonym name. So my main question upon when I came into researching this was how can students with ADHD receive the help that they need to progress and succeed in school? So first I wanted to look at what ADHD is. So there are main types of ADHD. There's inattentive ADHD and hyperactive or impulsive ADHD. And I wrote on the slide inattentive, and it used to be referred as ADD, but they that was in the past when they called it ADD, and currently they just call it inattentive ADHD. So we're gonna go over both. But what inattentive ADHD might look like in a classroom. Um, So these are some things that you might see in a student with inattentive ADHD. They might make careless mistakes, lack attention to detail, have difficulty paying attention to tasks or the tasks at hand, seem to not listen when spoken to directly, fails to follow through on instructions, chores, or duties or activities in the workplace, has difficulty organizing tasks and activities, avoids, dislikes, or is reluctant to participating in these tasks that require mental effort, loses things necessary for tasks or activities, is easily distracted by other things, including unrelated thoughts, forgetful in daily activities. Um, so those are inattentive ADHD. Now we'll look at hyperactive ADHD, which it tends to be a more like you could visually see this a little bit better. But hyperactive ADHD, some of the things you might notice are fidgeting with or tapping hands or pencils or squirming in their seat, leaving seat when they're supposed to be seated, running or climbing in places that are inappropriate to run and climb on, unable to participate in lectures or activities quietly, acts as if they're on the go all the time or driven by a motor. Talks excessively, blurts out an answer before a question has been fully asked, has difficulty waiting his or her turn, or may interrupt or intrude on others. So I got this information from the Awareness Center.com, a website. But some causes of ADHD I found interesting. Genetics plays a major part of ADHD. So if parents have ADHD, it's common for their children, or siblings might each have a piece of ADHD. And even like going over this, I feel like I even was like, oh wow, I feel like I have some forms of ADHD, which we might all, but for someone to actually be diagnosed with ADHD, and we'll talk about that later, but they have to have more than just like a couple things. But a quote by Scott Sharpiro, he says, complex births in children, for example, with forceps, when forceps are used, breech, premature, large babies with large heads are all associated with ADHD interference with blood flow in the brain at this young age. It isn't brain damage, but their brain has been slightly compromised at birth. So it can be possible for children if their brain like is messed with, I guess, like their head is messed with at birth, it can interfere with the blood flow of the brain that can cause ADHD. Frontal lobe injuries, like motorcycle accidents or accidents that cause head injuries to the front of the head. Radiation exposure, which it said was uncommon. And there is often more than one cause for ADHD. But so I was talking a little bit about this, but how it's diagnosed. So there's 9 symptoms for inattentive ADHD and 9 symptoms for hyperactive and impulsive ADHD, which those are actually the symptoms that I gave previous in this video. So someone who is diagnosed with ADHD will have 6 to 9 of these symptoms. It is possible for them to have just inattentive, just hyperactive and impulsive, and it's also possible for them to have both. But ADHD in the brain. So MRI scans have shown that the brain of a person with ADHD actually functions differently. The the prefrontal cortex is smaller, which is the control center of the brain and deals with attention, impulse, memory, and other things like that. Um, so normally in the brain, the more you try to focus, the higher activity level in your brain, but the opposite is actually true for those with ADHD. The more they focus, the less activity is present in the brain. Um, as well as it's been shown that there is lower dopamine in the brain of someone with ADHD. And that tends to be why they're compelled to seek things that stimulate them. Um, that's they can also cause like attention issues, and they seem to drift easily because they're always just seeking um, something that they're not necessarily satisfied. Obviously, this isn't everyone with ADHD, but generally. Um, so I wanted to talk a little bit about Skylar Rowe, the person I interviewed. So he was born in Glendora, California, and he was diagnosed with ADHD and OCD at the age of 6. Um, so when he was younger, he was super hyperactive. And he expressed that his parents didn't necessarily understand how to control him. He had impulse issues, anger issues, um, just like this little ball of energy. And he said that his dad had a video of him um, where he was just filming him run around, and his dad said, all he does is run, he never eats. And he's just like this little skinny thing that's just bouncing all over. But um, he his parents were able to get him medication and counseling and different things. But he was diagnosed at the age of 6. He did graduate from Alta High in 2018, as well as served a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But some experiences that he expressed were in school, not having many friends, which, while I researched this, it's actually pretty common for students with ADHD to not have very many friends, um, which is sad, especially as like a teacher watching your students. And you want them to be interacting with their peers and having that connection. But he expressed feeling alone a lot. And he also expressed like feeling frustrated with himself, like he couldn't reach the same level, wanting to reach that same level and doing everything he can, but his brain was just different. He talked about the process it took him to complete things like homework or tests was just longer. His attention span was shorter. Those are just a few of his experiences, but the themes that I found as I interviewed him was the first thing was medication. Um, so he has been off his medication for a little while. And it is possible for like a child who is put on medication to eventually like wean themselves off and find coping skills to cope with that ADHD. Um, but he talked about how the medication helped him be able to focus. He also said some side effects were depression, that he felt sad or lost while on these, which is it's possible, but these medications are stimulants and they affect the levels of that dopamine in the brain, which helps the person's attention and concentration. So a person with those, and I do not know how to read these words down here, but those were the medications that he talked about, um, and how it helped him be able to focus and do better in school. The second theme I found was counseling. And he talked a lot about counseling and counselors, and how well that they were able to listen to him. So going to just this therapy or counseling, as a child, they focused for him on that behavioral aspect, helping him control his outbursts or his impulses, helping him find joy in the moment or in the little things. He talked about um, working with them and just having them communicate with him well. Um, and so he talked a lot about the different skills that they taught him for coping with that. He has not gone to therapy as an adult, or counseling as an adult. Um, but as a child, he did, and it was effective for him both in and out of school. So, as teachers, if we see students struggling with that, it could be good to get them on counseling with a school counselor or just at least talk to them about that idea. The third theme was good communication, and this one was really important to him. Um, so he talked about having good communication with parents and friends and teachers, and even his counselors and everyone he interacted with. He shared that when he is in class, he expressed that if he has a question and raises his hand and it's not answered, he can't focus the rest of class until he gets his question answered. And his brain just does everything he can to remember that question. He talked a lot about the benefit of one-on-one communication with his teachers and how that was most beneficial for him. And even in college, going in and getting like that one-on-one time with a teacher or with an aide helps him in his learning. And he really talked about the importance of not being dismissed as a student. It's important to remember that these students who do have ADHD, it is not just like a behavioral issue. It is actually that their brain is wired differently. Their brain thinks and works and acts differently than our own, and we need to have compassion for that as teachers. It's extremely important. But so the question was, how could we empower students with ADHD using technology and literacy? And I was researching and I found just a list of different um, technology websites that you could use to help these students. Um, they have a lot of different things incorporated in the schools nowadays, especially in elementary, where they have programs that are constantly showing pictures and moving and giving kids different options, whether they can read or do math. I feel like this variety and this visual helps students in their learning. With ADHD, their mind does go a lot and they are distracted very easily. Their attention span is small. So when it's interactive and they feel like one on one with that technology, it can help them in their learning. So inspiring connections for families, when I was researching, I really just found that making sure you're keeping the parents posted on like homework assignments or different things, because sometimes the students may just forget. They might forget to turn it in or they might forget to do different things. So just having that family, like they are learning at school, but they are also learning at home and having that connection with the parents. You could also have like counseling, like counsel with the parents and talk with them. I think it would be good to even ask the parents like what works in your home, like what works for you, and see if there's ways that the student might respond better to um, in your classroom. Yeah, but overall, sorry. Overall, just making sure that the families that you really show an interest in helping their child with their specific needs. Um, So, how has my teaching practices changed since researching this ADHD and doing this project? So, before I really thought of ADHD more as a behavioral thing that, oh, they could grow out of this. But learning it, as like I was sharing before, learning that it is the way that their brains are um, just different than ours might be. And so it's really important to have compassion for that. And I interact quite frequently with people with ADHD. And so just making sure that I'm having that compassion and communication and getting on their level. Um, and really just, you a lot of the videos and different articles that I read talked about how you might go in the classroom and try to teach a student and have them on like this a behavioral chart or different things and give them stickers, but it seems that they're just keep doing the same thing over and over and they express that they want to change or you ask them to change, but it just seems like the same thing over and over. Maybe it's turning in an assignment late or not turning it in at all, or maybe it's tapping the pencil, but it doesn't seem it seems like they keep doing it over and over. But just having that patience and compassion, that's mainly what I've learned from researching this is just approaching it with more love and respect and an open mind for these students. Um, and so, what can teachers do to promote learning for students with ADHD? I think really just showing an interest in their growth. When I was talking with Skylar, he expressed that he got a love for engineering, which is what he's going in right now, because of his engineering teacher that he had in high school, was always working one on one with him and just like excited for what he was building and doing and showed a real interest in his progression, and it spiked his interest for engineering. And so um, just making sure that we're encouraging the students, and if they don't get it over and over and over again, just not giving up on them, but helping them and knowing that you believe in them. um, but some things also that I wrote down how we can help is really prioritizing communication, trying to understand where they are at, um, setting goals with them and helping them, addressing specific problems. So this might seem weird, but sometimes kids are not always aware that they do certain things. I know that when I was in 4-H, at a teen leadership training, we had a speaker come and he expressed that he was a kid who always tapped his pencil on the desk. And time after time, teacher would tell him to stop or send him to the principal's office. But as maybe like a third grader, he said that he was tapping his pencil and he wasn't even aware that he was doing this. But his teacher came up to him um, and said, "Can I speak with you after class?" And he was thinking, "Oh my goodness, what did I like? I know that I shouldn't do this, you know." And he's been told over and over, and don't tap your pencil. But he went to his teacher, and his teacher he opened his desk and pulled out a pair of drumsticks and said, "I think you'd be a fantastic drummer." Um, and just that, like, instead of getting frustrated at them at that boy, um, he then took those drumsticks and now he is like a professional drummer. So I forgot his name, but just making sure that we're encouraging them and addressing those problems. So and saying, I'm pretty sure that the teacher in that scenario said, like, you can drum, but just not in the classroom. Like, you have to be really careful. So he would be so excited, and eventually he was able to overcome that, like tapping his pencil, but he wasn't even aware sometimes when doing it. And I think students with ADHD might not always be aware of the problems that they're creating because their brain, they might just stand up and you don't know why, and they can't really control that very well. But just addressing that problem and helping them work through it, not necessarily being negative towards them, um, but just addressing it and wanting them to improve and being willing to help them. Encouraging professional help. We can't always, as teachers, fix every problem in the classroom, and getting medication, like we talked about before, and counseling and different things to help these students could be very beneficial. Being patient, listening to them, and focusing on the positive and celebrating their accomplishments. Skylar talked about this in the interview. When we focus on the negative, it's hard for them. He said he gets discouraged when all is talked about his negative, because he knows in grades and in different things he has a lot of those negative things. But when we focus on the positive and celebrate his accomplishments or their accomplishments, um, it can help them to see that I can do this and to grasp that hope. And also developing a routine was important. So then they can kind of get on that same schedule and planning and doing different things and helping them remember, because sometimes they don't always remember. Um, but yeah, that was my presentation on ADHD, and it was so much fun to study and to do that interview. Here are my resources, and I hope that you enjoyed.